My abode was filled with the aroma of spruce and roasted turkey, a scent I'd meticulously cultivated for 50 festive seasons. My entire kin was present, their visages illuminated under the soft, welcoming glow. But then, my son-in-law, Mark, rose to his feet. He gestured toward my seat at the pinnacle of the table, a chair my late spouse had crafted with his own hands. He regarded me, his gaze frigid, and announced with a volume for all to hear, "This chair is reserved for my father. Depart." Before I could even formulate a reply, he shoved me forcefully. I stumbled backward and fell onto the floor in front of my daughter, my grandchildren, everyone. As I lay there, the initial shock evolved into something else, a sensation both chilling and lucid. He believed he had triumphed. He presumed I was merely a frail, elderly woman, yet he was unaware that by the time the sun emerged on Christmas morning, I would utilize a single document to ensure he would awaken without a dwelling, and it would be entirely legitimate. Before I disclose precisely what I did during the quiet hours preceding dawn, I would be grateful to feel I'm not isolated tonight. Please let me know in the comments what city or country you're listening from. Your encouragement means a great deal to me. And please subscribe because you will want to see how this narrative concludes. The warmth emanating from the oven was a familiar solace, a cozy embrace that enveloped my kitchen every Christmas Eve. For 3 days I had been on my feet, baking the same sugar biscuits my mother had taught me to make. I slow roasted a fowl until the meat was ready to separate from the bone and simmered a gravy that smelled like every blissful memory I had ever known. My dwelling, the one I had shared with my dear husband for nearly 50 years, was vibrant with the spirit of the holiday. The scent of pine from the fresh wreath on the mantelpiece, cinnamon from the pot on the range, and the faint, sugary fragrance of melting candle wax. My daughter, Chloe, was in the living room with her son, my grandson Michael. I could hear their giggling, a sound that made all the effort worthwhile. Her husband, Mark, was also present. His existence was less a source of comfort and more of a stipulation I had learned to manage for the sake of my daughter's contentment. When they first relocated here 3 years ago after Mark's commercial endeavors failed, it was meant to be for 6 months, just long enough for them to regain their footing. But 6 months stretched into a year and then another. My tranquil, organized home transformed into their disorderly, occupied domain. My belongings were relegated to the basement, my routines were disrupted, and my viewpoints were politely disregarded. Nevertheless, it was Christmas. And for Christmas, you prioritize family. "Mom, the turkey smells exquisite," Chloe remarked, entering the kitchen. She gave me a swift peck on the cheek. "Mark's parents just pulled up." I felt a customary tightening in my chest. Arthur and Jean were perfectly agreeable individuals, but their presence always seemed to magnify Mark's worst attributes. His compulsion to impress his father, his arrogance, his casual disregard for anyone else's comfort. I smoothed my apron and took a deep breath. "Splendid! Everything is just about ready. Chloe, could you please ask everyone to join us in the dining room?" As I brought the gravy boat to the table, I noticed Mark was already there directing the seating. He was rearranging the name cards I had so meticulously arranged. My spirit sank when I observed what he was doing. He was taking the card with his father's name, Arthur, and placing it at the head of the table. That seat was my seat. It had been my husband's seat until the day he passed away, and in the 12 years since, it had been mine. It was more than just a piece of furniture. It was the keystone of our household, a symbol of the home he and I had constructed. Everyone knew this. I approached, keeping my voice light. "Mark, my dear, what are you doing? You're aware that's my spot." He didn't even glance at me. He just grinned broadly at his father, who was entering the room. "Dad, I saved you the place of honor, right at the head where you belong." Arthur looked momentarily uneasy. "Oh, Mark, I believe that's Beatrice's chair." "Nonsense," Mark bellowed, his voice filled with feigned cheer. I stepped closer and placed my hand gently on the back of the chair. I looked directly at Mark, my voice no longer light, but firm and quiet. "Mark, this is my chair." He finally turned to look at me. The grin was gone, replaced with a flash of annoyance. Chloe scurried over, her face a mask of anxiety. "Mom, please, it's just a chair. Let's not create a fuss." "It is not just a chair, Chloe. It is my chair in my home," I stated, my gaze still locked on Mark. That's when he snapped. In front of my daughter, my grandson, his own parents, and the specter of my husband, he grabbed me, not by the arm, but by my shoulder, his digits digging in. He leaned in, his voice a low snarl that only I could hear. "You are an old woman in our way." Then, for everyone else to hear, he uttered the words that would reverberate in my thoughts for the remainder of the evening. "This chair is for my father. Depart." And he shoved me. It wasn't a soft nudge. It was a deliberate, forceful shove. My equilibrium, not what it once was at 72, was gone in an instant. I stumbled backward, my feet becoming entangled, my arms flailing for something to grasp. I caught the edge of the tablecloth, pulling goblets and cutlery with me in a wild clamor as I fell on the polished wooden floor. The room became silent. The only sound was the clatter of a silver utensil spinning on the wood before it came to a halt. I lay there, the sharp odor of spilled wine permeating the air, looking up at a circle of astonished faces. My grandson, Michael's eyes were wide with shock. Mark's mother had her hand over her mouth. My daughter Chloe just stood there frozen, her face pale, and Mark, he stood by the head of the table, his chest puffed out, looking down at me on the floor of my own residence with an expression of pure, unadulterated victory. The monarch of a fortress he had not constructed and had just seized. Time appeared to halt. I was a heap on the ground, a discarded decoration from a Christmas tree that no longer had a place for me. The chill of the hardwood seeped through my dress, a stark contrast to the festive warmth that had filled the room only moments before. More than the throbbing in my hip, it was the stillness that pained me, a dense, suffocating blanket of shock that no one seemed willing to pull away. My eyes found Chloe, my daughter. She stood motionless, her hands clasped at her mouth, her expression a futile depiction of horror. She looked at me, then at Mark, then back at me. She was a bystander at her own mother's disgrace. Her inaction was not just shock. I recognized it for what it was. It was the same idleness, the same desperate desire to evade conflict that had paved the path to this very instant. In that moment, the years of small concessions and quiet dismissals came rushing back, each one a brick in the barrier that now stood between us. My mind flashed back to a crisp autumn afternoon last year. Mark needed to borrow my automobile. It was my husband's car, a beautiful old Lincoln that I kept in immaculate condition. Mark had a venture meeting he couldn't be late for. He guaranteed to be cautious. He brought it back after dark, parking it in the shadows at the end of the driveway. The next morning, I saw it. A deep, nasty dent in the passenger side door scraped down to the metal. When I approached him, he barely looked up from his coffee. "Some moron in the parking lot," he said with a shrug. "People don't know how to operate a vehicle." There was no apology, no offer to repair it. When I pressed him, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Beatrice is a 20-year-old car. What do you expect me to do? It's likely worth more as scrap metal anyway. Later, when I spoke to Chloe, her voice was full of that conciliatory tone I had come to detest. Mom, he feels terrible about it. He just doesn't show it. Let's not make a big deal out of it. It's just a car. The important thing is he wasn't injured. But it was never just a car. It was my husband's car. It was my autonomy. And they had damaged it and dismissed it as worthless. Then there was the holiday. This past spring, the heater broke. Mark made a big display of being overwhelmed by the repair cost. To maintain the tranquility and to keep my grandson warm, I gave him my emergency credit card. For the heater and nothing else, I had said, my voice firm. The heater was fixed. A week later, I was scrolling through my tablet and saw photos of Mark and Chloe smiling, holding cocktails on a white sand coastline. The caption read, "A much-needed getaway." My heart had pounded against my ribs. I printed the credit card statement. The heater repair was there, followed by 2 round-trip airline tickets to the Bahamas and a 4-night stay at an all-inclusive resort. When I confronted them, Mark had the audacity to act offended. "We were exhausted, Beatrice. We needed a mental health break. Besides, that card barely has a limit. It's not like you use it." Chloe stood beside him, nodding. "We'll repay you, Mom. We promise." That was 6 months ago. I haven't seen a single dollar. But the worst, the wound that was still raw, was what they did to the living room. It was the essence of my home. Every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall told a narrative. The focal point was a large, beautifully framed portrait of my husband and me on our wedding day. I remember returning home from a grocery run one afternoon and stopping dead in the entrance. Everything was gone. The comfortable armchair my husband always sat in, the bookcase filled with my favorite novels, the small table that held our family albums. It was all replaced by a cold gray sofa and a gigantic black television screen mounted on the wall. I ran through the house, my panic escalating. I found my things, my life's possessions, piled in a corner of the damp, musty basement. My wedding portrait was leaning against a stack of old tires, the glass cracked. When I confronted them, my voice trembling with a fury I seldom felt. Chloe had tears in her eyes. "We wanted to surprise you, Mom, to refresh the place for you. It's more modern now." Mark stood behind her, arms crossed. "Honestly, Beatrice, it was all just junk. This is much cleaner, more functional." He said the word junk as if he were sweeping away dust, not dismantling a life. Lying on the floor, the smell of wine stinging my nostrils, I saw it all with a blinding clarity. The dented car, the stolen holiday, the desecrated living room, they were not isolated incidents. They were a campaign, a slow, methodical effort to diminish me, to erase my presence, to turn my home into their house, and my life into a resource for them to deplete. This push, this fall, it wasn't just a moment of anger from Mark. It was a proclamation, a final shove to get the last bit of me out of their bay. I looked from Mark's smug face to Chloe's terrified one. I saw the past, the present, and the future they had planned for me, and a cold resolve settled in my bones. My grandson, Michael, bless his heart, assisted me to my feet. He was the only one who stirred. He had his father's eyes, but my husband's soul. He kept asking if I was all right, his voice trembling. I couldn't find the words to answer him. I simply patted his hand and allowed him to guide me back to a chair. Not my chair, but a side chair, away from the head of the table, an observer's chair. The remainder of Christmas dinner was a masterpiece in denial. Mark's parents, Arthur and Jean, suddenly found that it was much later than they had realized. They offered rushed goodbyes, their eyes carefully evading mine. My grandson Michael wouldn't eat a morsel, his gaze fixed on his plate. Mark, having won his pathetic contest, sat in my husband's chair and ate with a sullen sort of pride, as if daring anyone to challenge him. And Chloe, she tried. She bustled around, offering dessert no one wanted, making cheerful comments that fell flat in the suffocating silence. After Mark's parents departed, she came to me, her eyes pleading.
Mom, I am so sorry. Mark, she just gets so stressed around the holidays. He didn't mean it. I looked at her, my daughter, and felt nothing. The space inside me that should have been filled with a mother's empathy was just a cold, vacant chasm. I didn't reply. I simply stood up, the ache in my hip a dull throb, and said, I am very weary. Good night. In my bedroom, I didn't weep. The shame was too profound for tears. It felt like a blemish, something that had seeped into my very being. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, the festive lights from the neighbor's house painting meaningless patterns on my wall. This room was the last corner of the house that felt truly mine. My books were here, my husband's photograph was on the nightstand, his smile a painful reminder of a time when this house was filled with love, not just responsibility. I tried to sleep, but my mind was a churning sea of resentment. Every small indignity from the past few years came back to me, sharpened by the evening's brutality. The hours ticked by, 1 in the morning, then 2. My mouth was parched, a desert of unspoken words. I decided to get a glass of water, hoping the simple act would quiet my thoughts. The house was dark and silent as I made my way down the hallway. The floorboards, which I knew like the back of my hand, creaked softly under my feet. As I neared the kitchen, I saw a sliver of light from under the door of the guest room, the room that used to be my sewing room where Mark and Chloe now slept. I heard their voices, low and tense. I didn't mean to listen. I just wanted to pass by to get my water and retreat back into my solitude. But then I heard my name. I froze, my body hidden in the shadows of the hallway. Mark's voice was a venomous whisper. I don't care if she's upset, Chloe. It had to be done. We have to establish who is in command here. In command? Mark, you pushed my mother on the floor. Chloe's voice was shaky, a whisper of protest. She'll get over it. She always does. I stood there in the darkness, every muscle in my body tense. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. Before I tell you the next words I heard, the words that would change everything, I need to know that there is still kindness in the world. If you could just take a moment to like this video, it would mean more to me than you know. It helps me feel that my story is being heard. And what I heard next was something I needed the world to hear.
She is a stubborn old woman, Mark hissed, and she is in our way. If she doesn't sign over power of attorney by February, I'm done waiting. My dad's lawyer told me what to do. We file for conservatorship. We tell the judge he's getting forgetful, that she's a danger to herself. He said it's easy. Once we have control of her assets, this house is as good as ours. We sell it, we buy a place of our own on the lake, and we put her in a nice, clean facility where she belongs. A nice, clean facility? The words were so sterile, so clinical. A place to store an inconvenient mother? I waited for my daughter to scream, to rage, to defend me. I waited for her to say, "How dare you talk about my mother that way?" But all that came from the room was a weak, whimpering question. But a facility, Mark? What would people think? That was it, her only objection. Not the cruelty, not the betrayal, not the theft of her mother's life and home, just the appearance of it all. What would people think? In that moment, standing in the cold, dark hallway of the home I had built, I realized the truth. My son-in-law was not my only enemy. The betrayal was not his alone. My own daughter was his accomplice. The floor had been ripped out from under me for the second time that night. The pain was a physical thing, a shard of ice piercing my chest. It was the kind of pain that doesn't make you scream. It's the kind that steals the air from your lungs and leave you perfectly, terrifyingly still. I stood in that dark hallway for what felt like an eternity, the cruel words of my son-in-law echoing in the silent space where loving memories used to live. A nice, clean facility? The phrase was a wrecking ball, demolishing the last standing structures of my affection for them. The pain was a physical entity. It was a pressure in my chest so intense I thought my heart would simply stop beating. Every breath I took was a gasp, pulling in the cold, poisoned air of their betrayal.
I did not storm into their room. I did not scream. I did not give them the satisfaction of knowing I had heard them. Instead, I did the most difficult thing I have ever had to do. I turned around, and with the silence and stealth of a phantom, I walked back to my room. Each step was a quiet declaration of war. My feet made no sound on the floorboards, but in my mind, each step was a thunderclap, sealing their fate. Back in my sanctuary, I closed the door. The soft click of the latch sounded like a vault being sealed. I did not turn on a light. I sat in the armchair by the window, the one my husband always said had the best view of the morning sun, and I let the pain wash over me. It was a cleansing fire. It burned away the years of hope that Chloe would one day stand up for me. It burned away the excuses I had made for Mark's behavior. It burned away the soft, pliable heart of a mother who had been willing to sacrifice her own peace for her child's happiness. When the flames died down, all that was left was a core of ice. I thought of the words conservatorship, incompetent, sell the house. For 40 years, I worked as a senior legal secretary. I typed those words. I filed documents with those words. I saw families tear each other apart over those words. I had always viewed those situations with a professional pity, a detached sympathy for strangers. I never imagined, not in my wildest nightmares, that my own daughter would be planning to use them against me. The shock faded and was replaced with a chilling, razor-sharp clarity. They saw me as a problem to be managed, an asset to be liquidated, an obstacle on their path to a house on the lake. They were not just ungrateful, they were predators, and I, in my loving blindness, had been their prey for too long. I looked at the photograph of my husband on my nightstand. His kind, smiling eyes seemed to look right through me. I was not asking for comfort anymore. I was looking for the strength he always knew I had. He used to call me his steel magnolia, soft on the outside, unbreakable on the inside. I had forgotten that part of myself. Chloe and Mark had certainly never seen it. They were about to. As the first gray light of Christmas morning filtered through my window, a decision settled over me as calm and final as a winter frost. There would be no more conversations, no more appeals to a love that clearly did not exist, no more setting boundaries they would just trample over. My goal was no longer to fix my family, it was to survive it. I rose from the chair and got dressed. I put on a nice sweater, did my hair, and applied a touch of lipstick. Armor. When I walked into the living room, they were already there. Chloe was making coffee, her eyes red and puffy. Mark was on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, the arrogant monarch back on his throne. They both looked up, surprised to see me. They were expecting a weeping, broken old woman. They were not expecting me to walk in and say, with a calm, neutral voice, "Merry Christmas, Michael, darling. Shall we see what Santa brought?" The rest of the morning was a surreal performance. I watched my grandson open his gifts with a genuine smile. I watched Chloe hand me a cashmere scarf with trembling hands, her eyes begging for a forgiveness I would never give. I even accepted a gift from Mark, a generic box of chocolates, and thanked him with a politeness that was colder than any winter storm. They were confused by my demeanor, my silence, my composure, my complete lack of emotional reaction. They could see me exchanging glances, trying to figure out this new version of me. They mistook my calm for surrender. They believed my silence was the quiet grief of the defeated. They thought that after a few days of sulking, I would get over it, just like I always did. They had no idea that my mind was already miles away, working with the cold, methodical precision of the woman I used to be, the woman who organized complex legal cases, who cross-referenced evidence, and who knew that every victory depended on the strength of your documentation. They thought I was mourning the end of our family, but I was simply planning the end of their comfortable life. After the last gift was unwrapped, I stood up. "If you'll excuse me," I said to the room at large, "there's something I need to take care of in the basement." Chloe looked up, a flicker of alarm in her eyes. "The basement, Mom, it's Christmas. What could you possibly need down there?" I gave her a small, thin smile. It did not reach my eyes. Just some old paperwork I need to find. They watched me as I walked out of the room, their faces a mixture of pity and confusion. They thought my mind was finally slipping, that I was retreating into the eccentricities of old age. They had no idea I was walking toward the one place in this house they had never valued, the place where they had stored my memories as junk, the place where my husband and I had kept every deed, every contract, every secret, the place that held every weapon I would need to dismantle their little coup before the New Year's ball ever had a chance to drop.
The basement stairs groaned under my weight, a familiar protest that echoed in the heavy silence. A single bare bulb cast long shadows over the landscape of my discarded life. There was the armchair my husband had loved, its familiar floral pattern now gray with a fine layer of dust. Stacks of my books were piled in a corner, their spines warped by the damp. And there, leaning against the wall, was the cracked glass of my wedding portrait, my own smiling face looking out from a past that felt like another lifetime. This wasn't a basement. It was a tomb, a place where Mark and Chloe sent my memories to die. But I had not come down here to grieve. I had come to excavate. In the far corner, behind a broken treadmill and boxes of their winter attire, was what remained of my small home office. The desk was buried under their junk, but I wasn't looking for the desk. I was looking for what was under it. I knelt, the cold concrete biting into my knees, and pushed aside a heavy box. And there it was, a heavy fireproof lockbox, matte, black, and unassuming. They must have seen it 100 times and dismissed it as just another piece of old clutter. I reached under the collar of my sweater and pulled out a thin silver chain. A small tarnished key hung from it, a key I had worn every day for the last 30 years. My husband had given it to me, a silent promise I was only now beginning to comprehend. With a steady hand, I unlocked the box. The click of the lock was a satisfying metallic sound in the quiet gloom. Inside, the scent of old paper and history greeted me. There were our birth certificates, my husband's honorable discharge from the Army, the deed to the house from when we first purchased it in 1975. And underneath it all, nestled in a thick leather-bound folder, was the document I was looking for. The title on the front was printed in a crisp, old-fashioned font. The Beatrice and Charles Miller Revocable Living Trust. My fingers, though, remembered the feel of this paper. I had typed up drafts of it myself all those years ago. My husband Charles had been a meticulous planner. He didn't trust a simple will. A will can be contested, Bia, he had told me, his voice serious as we sat in our lawyer's office. A trust? A trust is an iron fortress. As I read the familiar legal language, the power of his foresight washed over me. Upon his death, I had become the sole, undisputed trustee, the administrator, the one person with absolute authority over every asset within the trust. And the most important asset, the only one that mattered now, was this house. Chloe and Mark were named as beneficiaries. Yes, they would inherit the house upon my death, but the two most important words in the entire document were revocable and trustee. As trustee, I had the power to amend, to change, to revoke any part of the trust at any time for any reason without needing anyone's permission. A memory sharp and vivid came to me. Charles signing the final page. He looked at me across the mahogany desk, a warm smile on his face. Now I know you'll always be safe. This house is your fortress, Beatrice. Don't ever let anyone take it from you. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude. This document was his last gift to me. It was the love of a good man reaching across the years to protect me when I needed it most. It was the weapon he had left behind for me to defend myself. And their plan, their cruel, pathetic little plan to have me declared incompetent. I almost laughed. A legal secretary with 40 years of experience declared incompetent? They would need more than the advice of Mark's father's lawyer. They would need an army.
And even then, this trust was designed to be a shield against exactly that kind of attack. It was all laid out clause by clause. My fortress was even stronger than I remembered. My mind, once clouded with pain, was now a beacon of clarity. The path forward was not emotional, it was procedural. Step 1, amend the trust to remove Chloe and Mark as beneficiaries. Their inheritance, the future they were so eager to claim, would vanish with the stroke of a pen. Step 2, remove them from the property. They were not tenants, they had no lease. But to make it airtight, to leave them no legal loophole, a formal eviction was the cleanest, most decisive way. I rummaged through the folder and found a business card clipped to the front of the trust. It was not for our old family lawyer. It was for a service I had used many times in my professional life, a service for emergencies and urgent matters. Mobile Notary Public, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I sat back on my heels in the dim light of the basement, the powerful document in one hand and the small, unassuming business card in the other. Faintly from upstairs, I could hear the sound of the television and a burst of laughter. They were enjoying their Christmas, content in their belief that they had broken me, that they had already won. Down here, surrounded by the history they had tried to erase, I was about to teach them a lesson in legal history, a lesson about the difference between a house and a home. They lived in my house, but they had forgotten it was my home. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I dialed the number on the card. The time for sorrow was over. The time of procedure had begun.
The voice on the other end of the line was professional and awake despite the early hour of Christmas morning. Mobile Notary, this is Maria speaking. How can I help you? I didn't hesitate. Using the calm, clear tone I had once used to schedule depositions and court filings, I stated my needs. Good morning, Maria. My name is Beatrice Miller. I require a notary at my residence as soon as possible to witness and certify 2 legal documents. I gave her my address and confirmed the fee. She said she could be there in 1 hour, 7 a.m. Perfect. Mark was never awake before 9, especially not on a holiday. After I hung up, a profound sense of calm settled over me. There was no fear, no doubt, just the quiet hum of a machine that has been set in motion. I did not spend the hour pacing. I went to my desk and pulled out 2 sheets of my finest stationery, the kind I reserve for important correspondence. My hands, which had trembled with shock the night before, were now perfectly steady. Drawing on 4 decades of legal experience, I began to write. First, the amendment to the Revocable Living Trust. The language was simple, direct, and legally airtight. I, Beatrice Miller, as sole trustee, do hereby amend the list of beneficiaries, removing Chloe Miller and Mark Thompson, effective immediately. The inheritance they had been so eager to steal was gone, vanished into thin air with a few strokes of my pen. The second document was harder, but necessary, the notice to vacate. I stated the facts plainly. They were to vacate the premises at my address within 30 days by order of the property owner and trustee. I cited their hostile and abusive behavior as the cause, creating a paper trail that would protect me if they decided to challenge it. This wasn't a mother asking her children to leave. This was a property owner exercising her legal rights. Just as I finished, I saw the headlights of a small car pull into my driveway. A woman with a professional demeanor and a heavy briefcase stood at my door. Miss Davis? I led her to the kitchen table, the site of my humiliation, and prepared to turn it into the site of my liberation. She laid out her ledger and her official seal, her movements crisp and efficient. As I watched her press the stamp into the ink pad, I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. This was the world I understood, a world of rules, of laws, of cause and consequence.
I am taking this step to reclaim my home and my dignity, and I want to ask you to become a part of a community that supports this kind of strength. Please, if you haven't already, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Your support sends a message that no one is ever too old to fight for their own life. You will not want to miss what happens when they finally read these papers. With Miss Davis as my witness, I signed the first document. My signature, once shaky, was now firm and resolute. I felt the invisible chains of obligation and unreciprocated love fall away. I was no longer their mother in that moment. I was Beatrice Miller, a woman of sound mind and firm resolve. Then I signed the second, the eviction notice. It was not an act of anger, it was an act of survival, a necessary amputation to save myself from the disease of their greed. Miss Davis carefully notarized each signature, her official stamp pressing into the paper with a satisfying thud. The documents were now legally binding, irreversible. She packed her briefcase, I paid her fee, and she was gone as quietly as she had arrived. The entire transaction took less than 15 minutes. I stood alone in my kitchen, the first rays of Christmas morning light streaming through the window. In my hands, I held two pieces of paper. One was a shield, the other was a sword. I took the eviction notice and folded it neatly, slipping it into a crisp white envelope. In my clearest cursive, I wrote two names on the front, Mark and Chloe. I walked over to the counter. I looked at the coffee machine, the expensive top-of-the-line model they had purchased themselves with my credit card last year. It was the first place Mark went every single morning. I placed the envelope directly in front of it, propped up against the sugar bowl. It was impossible to miss. A single white envelope sitting in the heart of my home. It looked so innocent, so small, but I knew it was a declaration of independence, a time bomb, a final answer to the question of who was in charge of this house. I turned and walked back to my bedroom. The scent of fresh coffee already beginning to fill the air. Their Christmas was over. Their free ride had come to a screeching final halt. They just didn't know it yet. All that was left to do now was to wait for the sounds of my quiet, peaceful morning to be shattered by the explosion I knew was just a few hours away.
Sat in my armchair, a novel open in my lap. The house was slowly coming to life around me. I heard the shower run, then the soft patting of my grandson Michael's feet as he went to play with his new toys. Outside, the morning was bright and cold, the kind of perfect, still Christmas day that usually filled me with a quiet joy. Today, it filled me with a quiet anticipation. I was not reading. I was listening. At precisely 9:13, I heard the familiar heavy tread of my son-in-law making his way to the kitchen. It was a sound I used to dread, the sound of the day's first demand about to be made. Today, it was the sound of a countdown timer reaching 0. I heard the click and whir of the coffee machine, then a pause, a silence that stretched just a second too long. It was the sound of a mind failing to comprehend what it was seeing. The silence was broken by the sharp rip of an envelope being torn open. I imagined him standing there in his pajamas, his face slack with confusion. Then I heard a short, choked sound. It wasn't a laugh, not quite. It was a bark of pure disbelief. "Chloe!" His voice was a harsh roar that cut through the morning peace. "Get in here! You've got to see this!" I heard Chloe's hurried footsteps, her concerned murmurs. "What is it, Mark? What's wrong?" There was the rustle of paper changing hands. Another silence, this one followed by a sharp, horrified gasp from my daughter. "Oh my God, she whispered. The disbelief finally curdled into rage. The footsteps were no longer walking, they were stomping. A furious, thundering sound that shook the old floorboards of the hallway, coming directly towards my room. My bedroom door, which had always been a private space, was thrown open with such force that it slammed against the wall, rattling the pictures in their frames. Mark stood in the doorway. An animal, in human form. His face was a blotchy, furious red. The eviction notice was crumpled in his fist. Chloe hovered behind him, her face pale and streaked with fresh tears. "What is this?" he snarled, waving the paper at me. "Is this some kind of sick, senile joke?" I did not flinch. I slowly, deliberately placed my bookmark between the pages of my novel and set it down on the table beside me. I folded my hands in my lap. I said nothing. My silence was like gasoline on his fire. He stormed into my room, invading my sanctuary. "You can't do this. You can't just kick us out. This is our home. Chloe grew up here." "Mom, please," Chloe sobbed, stepping around him. "How could you do this to us on Christmas Day of all days? You're destroying our family." "Destroying the family?" Mark laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "She is the family. We are the ones who have been looking after her. Who do you think keeps this big empty house from falling apart? Who keeps you from being a lonely old woman rattling around in the dark? This is how you repay us?" They stood before me, a tempest of manufactured outrage and genuine panic. He was the accuser, the bully trying to intimidate me into backing down with pure volume and rage. She was the professional victim, her tears a well-practiced tool of emotional manipulation. For years, this exact combination had worked on me. His anger would frighten me, and her tears would make me feel guilty. I would always be the one to apologize, to smooth things over, to give them what they wanted, just to restore the peace. But I was not the same woman they had known yesterday. I just sat there, in my armchair, and watched them. I watched the way Mark's hand shook with fury. I watched the way Chloe's tears were carefully aimed to make me feel like a monster. I listened to their accusations, their threats, their pathetic attempts to rewrite history and paint themselves as my saviors. They were expecting me to cry, to argue, to defend myself. They were expecting a fight. What they were not expecting was a mirror. My silence was a mirror reflecting their own ugliness back at them, and it was driving them mad. "Think about Michael," Chloe cried, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Your grandson. You're making your own grandson homeless for Christmas. What kind of grandmother does that?" I finally moved. I picked up my reading glasses from the table and began to slowly polish the lenses with a soft cloth. This small, calm, ordinary action seemed to enrage Mark more than any shouting match ever could. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over me. His voice dropped to a low, threatening growl. "You've lost your mind, Beatrice. That's what this is. You're not fit to make decisions anymore. Maybe that lawyer was right. Maybe it is time we stepped in to manage things for you." He had finally said it. The threat was out in the open. He was trying to see if it would still work. He finished his tirade, his chest heaving. Chloe's sobs had subsided into choked whimpers. The room was filled with the acrid smell of their desperation. They had thrown every weapon they had at me, and I had not moved an inch. They stood there, breathless and furious, waiting for my response. "Well, Mark," yelled finally,
his voice cracking. Are you gonna say something? You can't just sit there. Explain this.
I finished polishing my glasses and slowly put them on. The world came into sharp, clear focus. I looked at Mark's furious, pleading face, and then at my daughter's, which was a mess of tears and panic. They were waiting for an explanation, for a negotiation, for a way to rewind time and get their comfortable lives back. I was about to inform them that no such path existed. My voice, when I finally spoke, was not loud. It did not tremble. It was the calmest sound in the room. "There is nothing to explain," I said simply. "The document in your hand is a legal notice. It means exactly what it says. You have 30 days to vacate my home." "Your home?" Mark sputtered momentarily, losing his footing. "This is our home. We live here." "No," I corrected him gently. "You have been living here. There is a difference. You have been guests, and your visit is now over." "Mom, you can't be serious," Chloe wept. "We have nowhere to go. You'd really throw your own family out on the street?" This was the moment, the final desperate pull on my heartstrings, the last attempt to wield the power of motherhood against me. I held up a single hand, a quiet gesture for silence. To my own surprise, they both stopped talking. Their mouths hung open. They were finally, truly listening. Before I tell them the secret I had been holding in my heart all morning, the words I overheard in the dark that gave me the strength to do all this, I want to thank you for coming this far with me. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever felt invisible or disrespected, please let me know in the comments. Reading your words of support gives me more courage than you can imagine. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer before I let the final blade fall. I turned my gaze from Mark and fixed it on my daughter. My voice remained soft, but it carried an edge of cold, hard steel. "Chloe, last night was a difficult night for me. After you all went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I was upset. I went downstairs to get a glass of water around 2 o'clock in the morning." I watched her face as I spoke, saw the first flicker of dawning horror in her eyes. She knew what was coming. "The house was so quiet," I continued, my voice a serene, level narrative, "and as I walked past your room, I heard you talking. I didn't mean to listen, but your voices carried. You were discussing me." Mark's face went from red to a sickly pale white. Chloe looked like she was about to faint. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply recited their own words back to them, like a court stenographer reading back testimony. I believed the plan was to have me declared incompetent. The legal term you were discussing was a conservatorship. You were going to tell a judge that I was forgetful, a danger to myself. I paused, letting the weight of their conspiracy fill the room. "Because I am, and I'm quoting your husband now, Chloe, a stubborn old woman who is in the way. And once you had control of my assets, you were going to sell my house, this house, buy a place for yourselves on the lake, and put me in a nice, clean facility." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of guilt, of discovery, of utter and complete defeat. There was no more yelling, no more crying, no more accusations. There was only the ugly, naked truth lying exposed on the floor between us. They had been caught. Their secret, vicious little plan was no longer a secret. Chloe made a small, wounded sound in the back of her throat,
and covered her face with her hands, her body shaking with real, genuine sobs of shame. Mark just stood there speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. All the fight, all the arrogant bluster had drained out of him, leaving behind the small, frightened man he had always been. I stood up from my armchair. The action was final. The audience was over. "So you see," I said, my voice as calm as ever, "there is nothing to discuss. The eviction notice stands. The trust has been amended. This is no longer your home, and I am no longer your safety net. This conversation is over." I walked past them out of my own bedroom, leaving them standing there like statues in the wreckage of the future they had so arrogantly tried to steal from me. They finally understood. The game was not just over. They had never even been playing. What they didn't understand yet was that this was not the end of their problems. It was only the beginning. Their comfortable, subsidized world had just been pulled out from under them, and the harsh, cold reality of what a life built on greed and disrespect actually cost was about to come crashing down on them with a force they could never have imagined.
The 30 days that followed were the longest and quietest I had ever experienced in my own home. The explosive confrontation on Christmas morning had given way to a tense, suffocating truce. Mark and Chloe moved through the house like phantoms, their voices reduced to hushed, urgent whispers behind their closed bedroom door. They avoided me, their eyes darting away whenever I entered a room. The grand performance of being a happy family was over. All that was left was the awkward, miserable reality of strangers living under the same roof. I did not engage. I did not gloat. I simply went about my days. I drank my tea. I read my books. I tended to my winter garden. I was a rock in the middle of their frantic, churning river of panic, and my stillness was a constant, unnerving reminder of their deadline. From my quiet corner, I watched their world unravel. I would hear snippets of their desperate phone calls. Mark, his voice stripped of its usual bravado, pleading with a bank representative. "What do you mean my credit score is too low? There must be a mistake." I heard him get denied for 3 different loans in a single afternoon. The man who had planned to sell my $600,000 home didn't have enough credit to be approved for a $2,000 personal loan. Chloe tried a different tactic. She attempted to appeal to a past that no longer existed. One afternoon, I came into the living room to find a scrapbook of old family photos left open on the coffee table. Pictures of her as a little girl, of me and her at her high school graduation, of all of us at Michael's first birthday. It was a clumsy, transparent attempt at emotional warfare. I looked at the photos, felt a brief pang of sadness for the girl she used to be, and then closed the book and put it back on the shelf. I would not allow my memories to be used as a weapon against me. The true humiliation came about a week before their deadline. I was in the kitchen when I overheard Mark on the phone in the next room. His voice was different. The anger was gone. The arrogance was gone. It was the small, pleading voice of a child. He was talking to his father. "Dad, I know. I should have saved more," he mumbled into the receiver. "But things just got away from us. We have nowhere to go. Chloe is a wreck. Can we just stay with you for a little while, just until we get back on our feet?" There was a long pause. I could imagine Arthur on the other end, his disappointment a heavy weight on the line. The son who had tried to honor him by displacing me was now coming to him as a beggar. "No, I understand," Mark said, his voice cracking. "I know it's a lot to ask." He hung up the phone, and for the first time in the years I had known him, I heard the sound of my son-in-law crying. They didn't move in with his parents. Arthur and Jean co-signed a lease for them, but that was all. On the 30th day, a small, battered moving truck pulled into my driveway. The sky was a bleak, unforgiving gray, a perfect reflection of the occasion. Watching them pack was a pathetic sight. The The giant television, the cold gray sofa, the expensive coffee machine, all of it looked cheap and out of place as they hauled it out of the home they had tried to claim as their own. I watched from my bedroom window as my grandson Michael carried a small box of his toys to the truck. He stopped at the end of the driveway and looked back at the house, his face a sad, confused portrait. Of us all, he was the only true victim. My heart ached for him, but I knew that staying in a toxic home, watching his father disrespect his grandmother was no childhood for him either. This was a painful but necessary surgery. A week later, Chloe called me. Her voice was thin, tired. The apartment is small. The neighbors are so loud. The landlord won't fix the leaky faucet. She was waiting for me to offer a solution, to offer money, to offer to fix it. I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry to hear that it is difficult, Chloe," I said, my voice kind but firm. "I hope you are able to make it work." I did not offer to help. The Bank of Mom was permanently closed. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I walked through every room of my home. The air was different. The silence was no longer heavy with resentment and things left unsaid. It was a clean, peaceful silence, a silence that sounded like freedom. The echoes of their chaos had finally faded. The consequences of their choices were now their burden to bear in a small apartment with a leaky faucet, and the consequences of my own choice, my decision to fight back, were all around me. It was the beautiful, quiet, and finally undivided peace of my own home. 6 months have passed since that Christmas. Winter has melted away, and my garden is bursting with the defiant colors of spring. I am sitting on my porch, a place I haven't truly enjoyed in years, with a warm cup of tea in my hands. The air is sweet with the scent of blooming hyacinths and freshly cut grass. For the first time in a very long time, the house behind me feels entirely my own. It is not a battlefield. It is not a boarding house. It is a sanctuary. After they left, the silence they left behind was vast and echoing. For a few days, it felt like loneliness, but then I began to fill that silence with my own life. I took my husband's armchair out of the dusty basement and had it professionally cleaned and restored. It now sits in its rightful place in the living room, a warm and welcoming presence. My wedding portrait hangs above the fireplace, the cracked glass replaced. My husband's smile once again watching over the home he loved. I reclaimed my space piece by piece, memory by memory. I have found that my life, once shrunk to fit the needs of others, has expanded in ways I never expected. I joined a book club, and I now host a small group of wonderful, vibrant women here every other Wednesday. Our laughter fills these rooms in a way I had forgotten was possible. I took a trip to the coast, something I had always wanted to do, and walked along the ocean at sunrise. I sent my grandson Michael a postcard from every town I visited. My relationship with him is the one piece I was determined to salvage from the wreckage. I see him every Thursday. Chloe drops him off at the curb, and he and I have the afternoon together. We work in the garden. We bake cookies. We talk. He is a good boy with a kind heart, and he deserves a grandmother who is whole and happy. Chloe and I are polite, but the old intimacy is gone. Some things, when they are broken, cannot be put back together in the same way. I love my daughter, but I love myself more. I finally understand that is not a selfish statement. It is a necessary one. Sometimes as I sit here in the quiet of the evening, I think about that night, the fall, the shock, the cold, hard words spoken in the dark. It's a scar, and it will always be a part of me, but it is not a wound that still bleeds. It is a reminder of the strength I forgot I had. They thought they were pushing a weak old woman.
They had no idea they were pushing a button that would activate a lifetime of resilience, intelligence, and self-worth that had been lying dormant for too long. They saw me as a liability, but I have learned that I am my own greatest asset. Today, my peace is my greatest wealth. The journey to find it was harder than I could have ever imagined. But I know I am not the only one who has ever felt invisible in their own life. Every subscription to this channel feels like a vote of support, a message sent out into the world that women like me have a voice and a story worth telling. Please help this community grow. Help us become a stronger, louder chorus for anyone who needs to hear that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. The greatest lesson in all of this is that forgiveness and boundaries are not enemies. I can forgive them for their weakness, for their greed, for their cruelty, but I will never again remove the boundaries that keep me safe. I will never again make myself small to make others feel big. My home is my fortress, just as my husband always intended it to be, and my self-respect is the guardian at the gate. Never let anyone convince you that your worth is negotiable. Never let anyone treat your generosity as an obligation. And never, ever forget that true love does not use you. It values you. It protects you. It honors you. I am 72 years old, and I feel like my life has just begun.